All right, today is September the 2nd, 2018. Introduce yourself. Who are you?
My given name is Eleanor Jane Zook. Well, it was Eleanor Jane Denk, D-E-N-K Zook. My father was of German descent, and my mother of Croatian, and she was a ostrich. And I was born at St. Margaret's Hospital, which was around between 7th and 8th off of Central Avenue here in Kansas City, Kansas. But when I was born, we lived up above Grandma and Grandpa Sostrich's house in their second story, which was just a block away from here. And when I was 3, we moved out to 49th Street, which was past 38th Street, which was kind of the border. And I lived so far out, 49th Street, that kind of when I went to, grade school and high school, I didn't have school friends visit me because it was so far away from 3rd Street to 49th Street. That was some distance back in then. But that's where I started at 322 Ann when I was 3, and then we moved. And then even at that time, my parents brought me in here to St. John the Baptist Catholic School. And on free days or after school, I would go down to Grandma and Grandpa Sostrich's after school. And so I had friends here and friends in the, so to speak, country. And basically most of my friends were here, right in Kansas City, Kansas, on Strawberry Hill. And it was just fun days. People weren't afraid of letting their children out playing and running free, you know, and I especially remember Halloweens. We would go out on Halloween, and usually people gave money. And we'd come close to 9 o'clock, we'd sit under a lamp post and count our money. But also across the river were the packing houses, and a lot of the people worked at the packing houses. And they had this 9 o'clock whistle that blew. But when that whistle blew, you should be in your home, and you know, don't be any later than that. So we'd count our money and then hurry home before the 9 o'clock whistle. So we were at Grandma's for that. And it was just fun because it was so carefree. You know, you can go places and do things. The shopping area was Minnesota Avenue, which was several blocks. This is Ann, and then Armstrong, then Minnesota. But down around 6th on were the shops. And everyone walked. You know, we walked to the shops. The shows were there. We went to the movies on Minnesota Avenue, especially with my uncles, because my uncles were, 4 and 6 years older, the living uncles that we have now. And I was with them a lot. They were kind of my brothers. And there was a third uncle, Tony, that was a little older. I didn't run with him much, but Ray and Eugene, I did. And Tony taught me to drive in this old Model T car. We'd go down to North Kansas City, which is the other side of the river, and practice driving. And that's how I learned to drive a stick shift. And that was kind of my grade school, early high school years. In high school, I went to Ward High School, which was at 18th off of Minnesota Avenue. And again, it was a parochial school, so a lot of the same friends from St. John's went to Ward, so I had those same friends, and we'd walk from high school down here, you know, to home, this area, after school. And typical high school teenager, you know, it's just no different. I used to have to take this bus. It was called the Binskin bus. And it was an old school bus converted into a public bus line. And my parents didn't haul us places like the parents do today. You know, you got to be here at a certain time, there at a certain time. I had to take the bus because I lived in the country, and I had to come into school if I wanted to go to a basketball game. And I usually stayed with one of my friends that lived here in this area. So I'd come in, we'd go to the games, and then we'd come back this way with a friend. Or I'd stay at my well, let's see. Yeah, my grandparents were still there because the renovation with the interstate didn't start until, gosh, I don't remember. It was the early 50s, I think.
Do you mind if we pause for one moment? Sorry about that. So you were talking about the interstate being built, and I believe that was in the 1950s.
I think so. I think the interstate was built around that time because I graduated in 56 and my grandparents moved to 54th Street. That was their second home after their original home was demolished. And Ray was single then and moved in with them. And then he married and moved out. And Walt and I moved in with Grandma. Let's see, I graduated in 56. My father died in 57. Grandma Sostrich died in 58. I was married in 59, and then we had our first baby in 60. And we lived with Grandpa Sostrich in his second home. So it really worked out because he helped me and we helped him, you know. But getting back to childhood and growing up with my younger uncles was really something because Ray especially was kind of ornery. And they would get in trouble here at school and would come home for lunch, and then I would have to help them write their punishment. They usually had punishment to write. So they taught me how to hold 3 and 4 pencils so you can write one sentence at a time, 4 at a time. That was a real learner for me. And also they'd get in trouble, so they'd have to, the nuns taught us, so they'd have to show up at school on a weekend or an off day and wax and shine the hallways. So I was usually with them. They usually babysat. I spent a lot of time here, more time here than at home, because I was supposed to help Grandma. But when they were in trouble and they were watching me, they'd drag me along up to the school and they'd be polishing the hallway and put a pair of socks on me and make me shine after them, you know. So I had to take care of that stuff too.
What was the age difference between you?
Eugene is 4 years older than I am, and then Ray is just a couple of years older than Eugene, so about 6 years older than I. And they traveled. I even think they walked from here to 49th Street where my mom lived often, you know. So we spent a lot of time together. They would work on my bicycle, and I had the fastest bike on 49th Street. I want you to know, because, yeah, they fixed it up good. And they were just like brothers. They were ornery, and, you know, I had to do what they told me to do. And I remember one time we walked to the movies from this house here on Ann Avenue, and I kicked a piece of glass and it hit my leg, and I thought, oh, I'm going to have to go home. No, they wrapped it up with a handkerchief and said I just had to come on. You know, we were going to go to the movies, do or die, because that was a big deal, getting 10 or 15 cents to go to the movies. And then we'd stay for a double feature and get in trouble for staying over. So that was my, even being an older child, you know, I had older uncles to be my brothers, and I was right in there with them.
It sounds like this family has been displaced like numerous times.
Well,
it seems especially true with the interstate, with the war. Could you talk to that and how the community bonded through those times?
The community as a whole, it just seemed like a lot of the people from this area moved west a little bit, and like Grandpa went to 54th Street, and that was the first time really that they were displaced, because when here their World War II was going on, and the way the community was affected was that the men went to war. And I remember that them saying that if they heard that someone had died from the community, that the church bells would toll. And I remember standing in the bread line with my uncles again, because I think each family was allotted one, or each person allotted one loaf of bread. Well, they would cut the line and get in trouble, and I thought, oh, they're going to go home and leave me here in line. You know, it was that type of thing. That was the experience of the World War. And I think there are names out in front of church, if I'm not mistaken, that list the men that were killed in World War II. Uh, so after that, and they moved to 54th, a lot of the community members seemed to move west about in that area also. So the church there, which was very convenient for Grandma and Grandpa, was Christ the King. And it was like the western side of Strawberry Hill, you know, because there were a lot of Croatian people that moved out there, and then that was their parish. But you'd be surprised at that time how many came back to this area. Walt and I lived across the street, just across the highway from Christ the King, which had a parochial grade school, but we drove our kids in here to St. John's. And they did have a before and after school here at this building, this museum building, and so we would be out on this playground, you know, until my dad picked us up. Or when we got older, we caught the Benskin bus. That's what it was called, the Benskin bus home after school. So
whenever you were old enough to start riding in cars, were you allowed to date as a teenager?
I didn't date. I was allowed to date, but I was really backward in that area. Uh, my mom and dad didn't really instruct me well about dating and the birds and the bees and all that. And I didn't date much, but we could have.
Okay.
It was more a date type thing than times were today, where people, you know, the kids just go in groups.
Yeah.
And you're not really dating, you're just, you know, just in groups. But yeah, I was allowed to, but I didn't much.
Did you work through high school?
My mom was a disciplinarian. I remember one Saturday, we were all asleep, and she came in the bedroom, and she said, "What do you think you're going to do? Sleep all day?" It was about 8 o'clock, and start whipping the sheets off the bed, you know? Yeah, she found us jobs. We babysat. I know my sister Sharon helped clean houses. And my first job was a formal job. Well, I babysat a lot. And then I went to work at this little shoe shop on Minnesota Avenue, and that was after school, after high school. I think I got paid 50 cents. It wasn't an hour. I don't know if it was a day. Maybe a day or something like that. But man, I had to go. I had to be there for that job. I know I used to walk home from Ward High School to that job with a friend, so I wouldn't get there too early, so I wouldn't have to work too long, because I wasn't making that much money anyway.
What year
And then
did you graduate?
I graduated Ward High School.
And what year?
56.
56.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And yeah, my mom would find all of us jobs. My sisters, then the boys came along. They were kind of pampered because they were her favorites. But my father died when he was 44, so you can understand the need for discipline and working, you know. And my poor mother raised us 6 children. I was 18 when Dad died, and my youngest brother was 3, I think. And there were 6 of us. And she just managed. I remember one of the sweetest things was she would make povatitsa for the holidays and sell them, and that's how she made her money to buy us Christmas gifts. It wasn't an easy life for her, but you know, it wasn't an easy life in Yugoslavia either, because when a lot of the community went back to visit, she would not go back. She just said it was just too hard, and she didn't ever care to go back.
She sounds like a very strong woman.
She was strong and stern and kind of a shy person, you know. It just it was her and her family, and she kept us in line. I can't say that she had much really trouble to deal with, except with Mike, my youngest brother. You know, he was kind of wild, And that, again, was a sign of times, the hippie movements and that type thing.
Wow.
But we made it through, and she helped us.
Where do you think that reluctance to return to the old country comes from?
I think World War One, and it was just not. It was. She said it was just. My mother was born, and then she had two brothers born after her that died in infancy. I don't think they were very old, less than a year old. And then she had a third brother, Adam, that lived to be about 3 or 4. And Joe was born before Adam. I think Uncle Joe and Mom were 5 years apart. So there were two boys in between them. And then Adam was after Uncle Joe, but he died of something too. I don't know what the illnesses were back then. So that was hard. And I remember her saying one time Adam asked her to go and get the neighbor. Maybe he could help. The neighbor could help Adam, to get well. Well, that didn't happen, and I think that was during the time that Grandpa came here to locate a spot to live in America. And when he went back, Adam had died. But in 20, and it's just working. I know Mom said she tended the geese. There was this big rock. Stena it means rock in Croatian, I think they'd call the rock Stena. She would have to go to. Okay, so Mom would tend to this. She told me geese. She told Mike sheep. So they must have had animals. I don't really know what Grandpa did, but I know he worked out in the field. So I don't know if they had wheat or vegetables or what he did, because she said she would have to take him lunch out into the field. And she would talk about how Uncle Joe and her would, brother and sister would get into it, and they were barefooted a lot of times, and how messed up her feet were because he was always chasing her around. It was just not an easy life, and they weren't really in a city. They were in a little village. And she did say that Grandpa would make baskets and Grandma would carry them on her head down to the village to sell. So it was just, in that way, not easy living, She said they had a livestock that lived in the basement, and I imagine it as being an open basement where they, kind of a barn type thing, and they lived on the street level, so to speak, and then they would smoke meat in the attic, from the smoke and fire from the stoves and things. So it was typical old country living, and when she came here, that work ethic always stuck with her. It was the same when she worked, I think, and it was the same when she did anything. She would there was a system to what she done, and she got it done.
It seems like your grandfather Lewis had a really perseverant character.
Well, I think they all did if they came from the old country, because their idea was they came to a better country and they knew they had to work for what they wanted. And when Grandfather first came here, he went to Louisiana because his sister was here first, and her husband started a logging company. And he went to work, I think, in the logging company. And then how he came to Kansas City, Kansas, I don't know. Maybe it was the packing house, because that's where he worked. And this was a big Croatian community. So this is where he settled. He provided for his family all right. They had a really nice house. I thought I could name every room in that house still. And then after a while, each son or daughter that got married was able to live in their second floor. And then after they were married, they rented that out, and they had a little garage in the back of the house that they converted into a little apartment place, and that was extra income for them. Grandma didn't go out to work, but she was a person that could just look at an object and sew it and make it, design it, cut the pattern and all and make it. So she sewed a lot for the people. in the neighborhood or people that she knew, but she was also a good baker. They were all good bakers. And
Tell me about that. Tell me about the smells of your childhood.
smells, you could, well, there was this, growing up on Strawberry Hill, there was the packing house smells, you know,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you can call them the smells of the river, but you knew the river was there and flowing, and there was a tamale man that pushed a tamale cart, you know, and you could, if you weren't buying tamales, you certainly knew that the smell was coming from his cart. That was interesting, and just the nights, even in the country, you know, we just lay out at night and listen to nature, and we could sleep out on the driveway, which we often did in the summertime, and just hear the sounds. And here it was busier. You could hear traffic here. You could hear streetcars here. You could hear trains here. There was a train yard here, and it was quiet in the country, and you could see the stars. But
What are some of your favorite foods to eat during these family celebrations?
oh, that was, let's see, every Sunday, and this is where I would like to go back in time. That was really a change that I missed. Every Sunday, Grandma would make a chicken dinner, and you know, the family, anyone around would come for chicken dinner on Sunday. She'd have fried chicken, homemade chicken noodle soup. She'd make her own noodles, mashed potatoes. I remember they always asked my dad to mash potatoes because he could mash the hardest. And that was it. That was Sunday dinner, chicken and homemade chicken noodle soup, and we'd all sit around to a table and visit, you know, as many as can get around the table. And for weddings, people in this community would gather as families to prepare the food. Again, chicken and sausage and kraut and povatitsa, apple strudel, puhansa, which was they're like funnel cakes actually, and that was just, you know, homemade bread. Not so much. My mom didn't. Our grandma didn't get into cakes or cookies and things like that. Just the bread type things. They were all favorite. Whatever I could get a hold of was favorite. But those are what I remember.
How have you or even your family members tried to preserve your heritage from Croatia?
Food had a lot to do with it. One of the things that we did was at Easter time, we would have the blessing of food at church, and we would bring food to the church on Saturday before Easter. You'd fix a basket of food and bring it to the church, and Father would bless it. Well, that custom held pretty much, and I mean even held in the Christ the King Church when we moved west a little bit, but now it's kind of all faded away, and so we don't hold that custom so much. But most of the church holidays, the church celebrations are the same. Church, your faith, you're just grounded in it. It just, you know, for me, it's my life. You know, it just is something that's in me, and that was very important to them. And of course, it was important to them, or they wouldn't have built a church as a community. And around there, just up to another block up was St. Mary's Church, and that was the Irish church. And not far from that was Holy Families, and that was the Slovenian church. And then there was a Lithuanian church, the Polish church. There were just, you know, each community had their own church. And I've forgotten what the question was, but we're certainly bound in faith, you know, and all of those faith traditions pretty much still hold. Family traditions, we try for the longest time to hold a family meal together, but boy, that's difficult anymore today because of electronics, because people are just come and go, you know. It's hard to sit down and really have a meaningful meal. I've kind of failed in that area.
What do you hope that younger generations of your family will retain from the old culture?
I would hoped I would have hoped that they would have retained their morals,
Hmm.
but society plays such an important role in developing a child's life, I think, that it's very difficult. Unless you were really stern and really adamant, I don't know how you can hold moral values together today. It just is very difficult, and that's what I hope for my children, that someday they would realize that faith is important, morals are important, and they'd be much happier.
What does morals mean to you? Like, what are the practices of good morals?
Uh, to me, morals is leading a honest life, leading well, you can talk about laws again, church laws, civil laws. I would rather see my children married than living together, because we do have that in my family, and I see where the small children are affected by it. There's not a family unit as such. Uh, One family might have three dads. Now, that to me, there's a lot of morality in that area, unless those parents are really strong and can guide. I just like the straight and narrow. That's my feeling. If you sway off of it too much, you're going to have difficult times, I think.
Heather, I'd like to invite you. What questions do you have? This is your family. I felt like you should be able to experience that journey and just explore your own curiosity.
Well, Ellie, I'm just curious about so many things, but I'm an only child,
Uh-huh.
and my dad's father was Joe,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
And Joe, of course, changed his name
Uh-huh.
to just Sherry instead of Sostridge.
Uh-huh.
So I think that's interesting. I guess I'm curious to know what you thought of Joe. Um, maybe why did he change his name? Do you know anything about that?
Compared to my younger uncles, Joe he was older. He was a businessman. He was, I think, really and truly wanted to better himself in the business area. And I believe he changed his name for business purposes. Sherry would sell better. He had a store on Minnesota Avenue, actually, that I remember, where he sold radios, record players, uh, musical things like televisions, and he was a businessman. But I thought mild mannered. No one knows what a person is uh, behind closed doors, but he was just a very mild mannered man, and did really improve his life from the old country life. He in his business. So I don't know. He was Uncle Joe. He was. I liked him
How was
very
he?
much.
How was he different than Ray or Tony?
Well, he was older. He was older,
How
and
older was he?
and I think. Ooh, well, he was 5 years. Okay, he was 5 years older than my mother, and my mother was 17 years older than Emma Jean, which was Joe's sister. So Joe would have been, what, 13 years older than Emma Jean, and then a couple years later there was Tony, and then Ray, and then Eugene. So there was more than 10 years difference, and of course he came from a different upbringing. And Tony Tony was another mischievous one, and he got Tony into boxing. Joe got Tony into boxing to help straighten him out. And I don't know if that lasted very long, but it was just, he was kind of a father figure to them, too. Not only his own family. it was a different era. My mom and Joe lived in different eras than my younger aunt and uncles. So yeah, he was a neat person. I thought very neat person.
Could you could you tell me about how you understand the American experience, being the descendant of an immigrant family who experienced significant trauma from the Great War, and
Uh huh.
your grandfather Lewis, um, he was incarcerated in a prisoner of war camp. Yet he
Yes.
was able to rebuild a life for his family and this community, and it seems like that goal has trickled down throughout your family because you
Uh huh.
guys seem so tight knit.
You know, we really are, and that's another thing you don't see a lot of today. Tight knit families. Um, I don't know. I don't remember what your
What do you
basic question was, but
tell me what the American experience is for you, being the daughter and granddaughter of immigrants.
you know, I was in this neighborhood for so long. The American experience was almost my experience, I guess. You know, it wasn't until we moved out onto 49th Street that um I saw things any differently. Uh, I don't know. I was
What
just,
does it mean to you to have the opportunity to, you know, re- start your own life and start your own traditions in a new country, and but
uh-huh,
also be able to value and cherish the old culture?
uh-huh. Well, see, my tradition was the same as the old tradition.
Mm,
And I think Walt, my husband Walt's traditions were kind of basically the same because he was from what's known as Russian Hill.
mm,
There, the Russian church was down off of Central Avenue, and he was from that church, and those were immigrants too. So he lived the same dreams as everyone. His dad was a tailor. I know his mom worked at a mattress factory for a time when she did go back to work. So our values were the same. Our customs were almost the same. There wasn't much difference. You know, when I really felt a difference in cultures was I didn't feel that there was prejudice because there was uh, the Serbians evidently lived nearby, but I never heard my grandparents or parents talk negatively of other nations, of other colors. But when I went, it wasn't until my kids were grown, when our youngest one started college, I went to nursing school because that's what I always wanted to do. And I ended up working at KU, and there were a lot of different ethnic people at KU. And that it's just the first time that I've really noticed, you know, that there are really different people in this world. And while I was in nursing and left KU, I did some home health, and I always wanted to go to a third world country. Well, my area with home health was the inner city in Kansas City, Missouri, which is totally black, and the hardcore area of the Kansas City, Missouri. And I'd work in that area, and you know, I remember once stopping at a grocery store on the way home that was all white, and I thought, wow, I just come from a different country. You know, it was just that black and white. But I didn't ever feel that prejudice growing up, and I was thankful for that because I could make my own judgments, and I feel like they're good judgments. It doesn't color faith, uh, people's background just doesn't bother me. You know, it is what it is, and they live their life, and I live mine. So in that respect, it was probably one of the best experiences
wow,
of my life.
that's such a great answer.
Yeah,
Um, it's hot outside,
yeah.
so I'm gonna ask a question that I usually ask at the end of 3-hour interviews in which I've heavily researched the topic, and this is the question: Is there anything throughout this interview that you wanted to talk about that I haven't asked or it hasn't popped up?
Gosh, I don't think so. I'll probably think of a lot of things, but they're just, little things that happen every day or maybe, happened in and out of my lifetime. But no, I think we covered things pretty well. This was really, this area here was really my first home, and it will always be with me. I have no regrets whatsoever.
What's the takeaway from your life? Like, what's the significance of your life?
Again, the significance of my life is leading a good life and having a faith, because without my faith, I wouldn't have much of a life. I don't think it's such an important part of my life, and uh, I just see that in my family. It just like all you need is my faith. And you wouldn't have all the troubles you're having, or you'd be happier. But it just, I don't know, that's it. And again, I forgot what you asked.
Well, it's such a great answer because a similar question would be, what advice do you offer younger generations? What do you want your family's descendants to remember? What would you want to tell them?
I think I would tell them that, you're going to appreciate whatever you have more if you worked for it rather than if it were handed down to you. Because people can give and give, and you just want more and more, and there's no meaning to it. I think there's only meaning to things that you can put true work value to. That's probably one of the most important things, because there again, I see that in children. The more they have, the more they want, and it's just never ending. And I think if they're made to work for what they want, they'd appreciate it more. Even when our kids went to college, it was like, we'll pay 50% if you pay 50%. It wasn't a free ride for them either. But we got through it. They didn't have any bills waiting for them when they finished college. And I think that's so important.
Well, Ellie, I want to thank you so much for inviting me into your world and
Oh,
sharing
thank
your
you.
life history with me.
Thank you. Yeah.
And thank you, Heather, for your unique insights into this.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
final thoughts?
No.
Uh-huh.
Well, thank you very much.
Uh-huh.